let's get started on a topic that I think is going to attract a lot of interest and a lot of focus. This is the 156th Security Thought Leadership webinar. And we are typically here every Thursday at this time, where we discuss a topic of interest to the security world. Now, we weren't here last Thursday because we had the UK OSPAs in the evening. We had a thought leadership summit in the afternoon, the first physical one we've done in a couple of years, and it was fantastic. It was engaging. I can't tell you how informative it was, and delighted to be back on a webinar this week. And the topic this week is something that I think will interest many people: influencing opinion to improve perceptions of the security sector. What should we do? It's something of a holy grail around the world, that security needs to be perceived in a more positive or a different light. The question is, what are the barriers to achieving that, and how can we overcome them? And you know, the security world is quite shy at putting itself forward. Fortunately, we've got three panelists who aren't shy. And in a second, we're going to be coming to each of those, asking them to introduce themselves. And once they've done that, we'll be asking them for their opening statement, their views on what they've got to say about this topic. So without further ado, let's go and meet our panelists. And first of all, let's go over to Europe and meet Catherine. Catherine, can you please introduce yourself?
Thank you, Martin, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Catherine Piana. I've been an EU lobbyist for a little over 30 years, practitioner, therefore, but also theoretician, because I'm very interested in the subject of influence. And for the last 7 years, I've worked for COES, the Confederation of European Security Services, and for 5 years, the Aviation Security Services Association.
Catherine, thank you very much indeed. And let's go and meet Tom. Tom, can you introduce yourself, please, Tom?
Yes, hi, Martin. I'm Tom Reeve. I'm a writer, editor, and content producer. I've been involved in the security industry for over 20 years now. I was editor of Security Management Today back in the day. I then was also editor of CCTV Image Magazine, a couple of other publications along the way, and before leaving the physical security industry for a little while to work in cybersecurity on SC Magazine. I'm now back in physical security, working as a communications officer for the CCTV user group.
Tom, thank you very much indeed. And let's go meet our third panelist, Joe. Joe, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Martin. I'm Joe Connell. I'm a registered independent security consultant here in the UK. I'm a former police officer, mainly engaged on international capacity building in mainly government sort of sectors across the globe. I'm currently the elected chair of the Association of Security Consultants here in the UK. I'm a member of the UK Security Commonwealth and a former chairman of the Commonwealth Board.
And Joe is too modest to tell you he's formerly a double winner of the UK Oscars. I mean, that's the ultimate thing. Joe, thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed, panelists. I'll tell you what we're going to do. Audience, don't forget, if you'd like to get a question in, use the question and answer button at the bottom of your Zoom, QA. Get your questions in early and we'll incorporate that into the ensuing discussion. Without further ado then, let's go and hear what our panelists have got to say. 3 minutes where they get the chance to put their views across. Catherine, your opening statement, please.
Thank you, Martin. And I could speak for 3 hours, so I'll try to make it as short as possible. When I was preparing this session, I thought, what did I know or think about security before working for the security sector? And the answer to that is actually not much. I'd been just exposed to the tip of the iceberg, the security officer in my supermarket at Christmas, the security officer at the airport going through my stuff, and the security officer letting me in the Commission or European Parliament building. And I had no idea about the selection process, the skills required to work in security, the training and specialized training, the background checks. Basically, I had no idea this was such a professional industry. And so I think the priority area of our influence needs to be about the image and identity of the industry, because if we don't communicate about it, then we let others define us through their perception, beliefs, and experience, good or bad. So definitely we need to influence. Who do we need to influence? A range of stakeholders. The legislator, so that legislation is supportive. The authorities, law enforcement, because we cooperate with them in PPPs, and also they buy from us through public procurement. Customers, so that they go through best value procurement. The general public, because we need them to trust us. The media, of course, who are at the same time a target, but also a channel for communication. One very important point in influence is what's in it for them, for the people we are trying to influence. And yesterday we were having a meeting with an MEP about the future AI Act. And basically he was saying, I need a lot of information from you. Give me use cases, give me examples, give me concrete information. And so our process of influence is really listening to what the others need and then giving it to them as best as we can, offer help, examples, figures. There are barriers, and these are about perception, beliefs, and cliches. And again, I remember an MEP who had written a report about private security, and it was a big mixture of private security companies in the EU, but also private security in countries where the rule of law is weak, but at the same time also private military companies, all under the same definition. So there we need to offer facts and figures, explanation, tell our story. Another barrier is the finance, because basically clients will tell you, oh, fantastic, we love quality, but please, what is the bottom line? And that's one big, I think, barrier we're facing. But I want to end with reasons for hope, because I don't want to depress everybody. I think the recognition of the industry is increasing, and it's increasing actually in difficult times with crisis, the terrorism attacks during the 2010s, but also the COVID-19, and showing that the industry, the officers are there. They're there to help all the time. But also the value of security and security culture is becoming more recognized in aviation, in critical infrastructure, in public spaces. And I think we have to use this momentum to continue build our image and not let others define us. I hope I stuck in 3 minutes.
You said a lot and it was great stuff. Thank you very, very much indeed, Catherine. Plenty for us to come back on. Some of the audience already have questions coming. Do use the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen. When we've heard from the three panelists, we'll come to you and incorporate your questions. Let's hear what Tom Reeve's got to say. Tom, your opening statement, please, Tom.
Well, thank you, Martin. And thank you for inviting me to take part in this today. I mean, I'd start with, I come from a communications background, and you know what they say, give someone a hammer and they'll see every problem as a nail. So I acknowledge that there may be other ways of looking at this. But if we look at this as a communications challenge, these are the questions and challenges that immediately occur to me when I consider your question about how to influence opinion and improve perceptions. I mean, in any communications challenge, you need to start by defining your objective. You know, what do we want to achieve by improving perceptions of the security industry? I mean, do we want more people choosing to work in security, more money spent on security? As Catherine said, talking to businesses about, not just buying, at the bottom line. Do we want higher status? Ask yourself, what are the how concrete is the objective that you're trying to achieve? And then we need to understand where we're starting from externally. What is the current perspective of the security industry? What sort of hard data do we have? Polling data, employment data, economic data. What is the view of the sectors that we're trying to change the perceptions of? And then, and Catherine again alluded to this. Promise we didn't talk about this beforehand, but Also, very importantly, where are we starting from internally? It's no use setting off to change perceptions if you don't have your own house in order. And finally, it comes down to assessing, what resources are you going to put into this? I mean, you can do anything if you have enough resources, but what is the industry prepared to commit in order to achieve its goals once it's defined them? It isn't just about budget either, but it's also about personal commitment from leaders in the industry, and also who are your allies? Who are the people that can help you in changing perceptions of the industry? What natural advantages do you have that you can play on? One thing that springs to mind is, straight away is, the ubiquitous nature of security. It's everywhere. Therefore, we can start with, that sort of uniform coverage that we have in order to begin to improve perceptions. Now, I think the problem with the security industry as a whole is that it doesn't speak with one voice, and that makes it difficult to define its objectives. But it's not surprising, given the breadth of the security industry. I mean, it spans a huge range of activities and technologies, and the interests don't always align with each other. If I were in charge of communication strategy for the security industry, I would start by spending a number of months getting the industry, whoever that might be, to define its objectives, understand its current position, and assess its resources. And perhaps that would be a tall order for the industry as a whole, but I can certainly see it working in individual sectors, such as guarding and systems integration. So thank you very much.
Tom, absolutely fascinating. Thank you very much. And two fascinating opening gambits there. Let's just remind you, question and answer button at the bottom of your screen. And as soon as we've heard from Joe, we'll come and incorporate those questions and discussion points in the following discussion. Joe, your opening statement, please.
Thank you, Martin. I was recently asked by the City Security magazine here in London, what 3 key areas will shape the future of the security sector? And I named 3 areas, in my opinion. One is the effect of global events. 2, the success of partnerships and community ownership. 3, the continued building of professionalism and trust. Well, obviously, the tragic situation unfolding in Ukraine is a prime example of the first of those. But what are the other 2, which we can do much more about? Well, again, here in the UK, following the tragic terrorist attack in Manchester, the Protect Duty, a law that will impose security conditions, I guess, on suppliers, security industry and suppliers. It's currently exercising the minds across the government, across public and private security sectors, and other sectors too. So, for instance, local authorities, the corporate sector, the corporate world, the entertainment and leisure industries, insurance, transportation, and I'm sure many other sectors. The success of partnerships and community ownership in relation to problem solving in this sphere really do sit front and centre in the with us in the security industry in providing the potential solutions. So if that's the case, what's actually holding us back? And maybe it's the label. As Tom said, what is the security sector? Now, as insiders, we know that the security sector represents a vast and diverse expansion of skills and experience, ranging from highly innovative and technical right the way through to the bold and courageous. But how do we harness that diversity and skill? And how do we take the lead, maybe where others fear to tread? Who represents us, the government and industry, as an entity? And on what authority do they represent us? And how coordinated are we in providing that representation? Now, in a world of shrinking public sector resources and growing security industry, should we still be speaking in terms of public-private sector collaboration? Or would it be more appropriate to speak of private-public sector collaboration, where the private security sector takes the lead in enhancing the provision of public security services? Building of trust, of course, is critical. Security is ever present in all aspects of all our lives, again, as Tom mentions. But we have to ask, is it there simply to act as a service provider, or is it there to act as a key enabler of our lifestyles, our business, etc.? Martin mentioned we often celebrate successes within our industry. We're very good at it. We do it through the awards. We do it through an excellent security media. But again, by being so internally focused, as opposed to demonstrating our strengths and capabilities in other sectors, are we at risk of being viewed by others as a bit of a self-licking lollipop? Now, the building of trust within our sector is also vital. We're privileged to enjoy various active and very innovative trade and industry bodies here in the UK, but they're also guilty of following parallel tracks occasionally, overlapping, sometimes competing or even conflicting with each other. Now, if we were able to harness these activities, they should really serve as a force multiplier, where mutual benefits can be achieved and shared. However, as Mark Rowe, Professional Security Magazine, said recently, there is an elephant in the room, and that is the trade bodies are primarily staffed by volunteers. I'm going to plug now for the Security Commonwealth, which is a UK body, whose strapline is stronger together. Albeit the Commonwealth is without formal role or function at this time, and it's also staffed by volunteers, it may be worthy of further exploration as a potential platform for promoting and promulgating the strengths of the UK security industry, both internally and externally.
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much. Well, thank you to all three of you. That was thought-provoking. I know a lot of you say, don't we get good panelists? And the point is we get people talking about what they know about, and absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. Well, let's go and incorporate the questions. And Catherine, I'll start with you because Simon Roberts has asked the question. You mentioned in your opening statement, Catherine, about the need, one of the needs being legislation and regulators to get their act together. My words, not yours. But Simon Roberts is just talking about the role of regulators in enhancing the reputation of the security sector on the front line. And one of the problems we had, the thought leadership webinar, seminar we had in London last week, physical event, when we had a sellout audience. Michelle Russell, who was chair of the SA, was talking about being realistic about what regulators can do. They're restricted by statute, they're restricted by legislation. And I wonder whether if we don't have strong regulation, strong statutory requirements, we become, Catherine, at the mercy of the market. And therein comes another of the problems you alluded to. And I just wonder whether ultimately getting to the bottom line about it, using a hammer, as Tom was saying, to hit the nail on the head, you've got to have strong regulation as a start. Without that, you're always on the run. Catherine, then I'll come to each of the Joe and Tom afterwards. Catherine first.
Right, yeah, that's a big subject. Huh? COES has done during last year, we've looked at private security legislation in 30 countries and collected information about legislation. What we're trying to do is best practice. What do we think makes good, solid legislation for private security? And on that basis, then our members, our national association, can go and promote these models to their legislator, knowing that not everything can be transposed, that there's a different culture. For example, in Sweden, it's fine to have private security officers in the public space. This is a big taboo still now in France. But we're trying to cross-fertilize, so to speak. We're trying to, get cross-inspiration from the various countries and show, look, it's working in that country. It could be working in this country. So trying to really educate them, so to speak, educate the legislator to create legislation that in turn will help legislators. For example, I'm thinking about the Olympics in Paris. Our national association in France is really complaining because it's saying we've just adopted a new law for private security. It's nowhere near helping us provide right security for the Olympics. And we might be looking for a similar debacle as the one that happened in London for the Olympics. So we need to work together. But for that, we need to trust each other. We trust the legislator, but they need to trust us as well. So it's kind of a catch-22, really, with quality at the center. That's my opinion anyway.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect
sense.
No, absolutely. It's a perfect. Just for the audience who might not know that one of the big security suppliers over here was given the contract for London, and very late in the day didn't deliver on it. And it's really the knock-on consequences and reputation are still being felt today. In fact, only last week there was a talk about security can't be relied upon. The police ultimately had to step in, and others too. So it was a debacle. You're right, Tom. I want to come to you on this about, because you mentioned the fact that we need to understand where we are as a way of moving forward, Tom. And I just wonder whether ultimately you can have a better approach, as you've argued, in the way you communicate. But aren't we ultimately stuck with this reality that unless you force it, you're really at the mercy of a market? Or are there examples of where that just isn't true?
Well, that's another toughie. I think it would be nice. It would be good to have stronger regulation to drive the industry and raise standards. We're seeing in the CCTV industry, we had the Protection of Freedoms Act 2012, which created the Surveillance Camera Commissioner. But it's unfortunately it has no teeth. Basically the commissioner, his remit is to encourage people to abide by the code and the surveillance camera code and the 12 principles in it. And so we get a situation where people call for regulation in order to raise the standards, but then we get a very sort of lukewarm regulation to go with it. I think the industry should be pressing for stronger regulation. The industry back in the day, really lobbied for the Security Industry Authority, when it was created, and because they understood that was going to be something that was going to help to raise standards in the industry and ultimately improve the perception. And I think it has done. As Catherine said, we do have reasons to be hopeful because it has helped improve perceptions of the industry. But I think we could go a lot further with stronger regulation.
Yeah, okay. Now let me go to Joe. And Joe, I wonder whether I could pick up on something that you said on this issue in your opening statement. You mentioned the protect duty, and this is in the pipeline. We don't know what's going to happen in the UK yet, and we did a webinar specifically about this a couple of weeks ago, Joe. And the idea is that it'll be a legal requirement, basically for when an event is taking place, to make sure security is good enough, it's properly risk assessed, and there's appropriate security in place. Isn't this the holy grail of the security sector, Joe? Isn't that our moment in time to prove it? Last week, Barry Millett said it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Is it, Joe?
Well, I agree with Barry that it is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but the speed of events and the speed of regulation happen at different areas altogether. So regulation takes a long while to evolve for good reasons, adequate research, consultation, etc. But also events unravel very quickly. A few weeks ago, we weren't looking at an invasion of Ukraine, and then all the knock-on effects for security that would have. I know that's not protect. So yes, I think the regulation, the protect duty, I think protect duty is a great underpinning piece of work, and it will guide, and it's certainly exercising everyone's mind. We're all talking about it. We'll be talking about it for the next 48 months and beyond, until we know exactly what it is and what impact it will have. But at the same time, my only concern with regulation, protect duty is not probably the best example in this. My only holdback with regulation sometimes is that it can stifle innovation. and creativity, and dealing with the here and now. If we sit back and keep waiting for the instruction to come, events may have moved on, the threat picture may have moved on, the whole risk profile may have changed, and we're actually operating against yesterday's threats rather than today's or tomorrow's threats. So yeah, certainly support regulation, but it shouldn't stifle innovation and creativity. And every time something like this comes up, should be grasped as an opportunity to develop and to improve.
Yeah, thank you very much. And of course, the truth of the matter is, Joe, it also takes a long time. So we had better get on with it, hadn't we?
Absolutely.
It isn't going to be quick. Okay, Tom, let me come to you because I've got to mention a question here from Jodie Reeve, who's based in Canada. And it's talking about promotion of the security sector in the way other industries have done. And I guess his point is that other industries have set about changing the image of themselves, either internally to their stakeholders or externally to the public. And I suppose people would point to pockets of activity that have taken place in various countries. But it strikes me that perhaps Jodie's onto something here, that there needs to be something on a bigger scale with a bigger initiative. It's just difficult to see where the funding would come from or where the drive would come from because it's so fragmented, Tom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that's part of the problem, of course, with the industry is that it is fragmented. We have so many, it's spread over virtually every sector of the economy, and then it applies a whole different range of techniques, from manned guarding to electronic surveillance, and a lot of times people are advocating in terms of electronic surveillance because you save a lot of money on your manned guarding, and so there's these sort of natural conflicts and difficult to get the two sort of sectors to talk together. I think as Joe has alluded, I think the drive, the drive is going to have to come. I don't know where. I mean, where does the drive come from? I mean, that's partly where the security industry needs to be influencing the decision makers and the public, and finding ways to apply some to get the message across that this is the direction that we want to go in. We don't want toothless regulation. I mean, I take Joe's point about regulation can inhibit innovation. But it can also, when it's done properly, it can stimulate innovation, and it can actually drive organizations to do things that they wouldn't have done otherwise. So I think it's really important that we find, we find that kind of, that sweet spot, as it were, to push forward the kind of regulation that we need. And in order to do that, we're going to have to use the tools of communication, and as I said, we're going to have to start by working out, well, what is our objective? What do we want out of a change in perception of the security industry?
Yeah, and when you were talking, Tom, actually about as a sort of communicator, as an expert in communicator, about what the sector needs to do, and like all experts, you make it sound so obvious when you speak, but of course we're not doing that. I mean, the security sector is not really behaving in a way. There aren't these sort of global debates about what the message should be and where the priorities should be. And it's fascinating to hear someone who's an expert in that side talk. Let me have Catherine. You run an association, if that's the right word, or a group of 30 different countries. So you face precisely this problem, Catherine, I guess, about communicating. I mean, this issue of coming together. Okay, do you feel that's possible to do in a meaningful way on behalf of your members, which are released of the same sort of activities?
We have different targets, really. As COES in Brussels, our main targets are the EU legislators and the Parliament, the Commission, so the EU bubble, so to speak. And our members at national level have their own set of stakeholders. So, and as you know, of course, there's not much European legislation regarding private security. There's a little of it. There's legislation on procurement, on aviation security, on maritime and port security, but not on private security per se. So we have to, depending on the subject, there's things that we can do at European level, and then things that need to be done at national level. But what we need to have in common is the narrative. It's the crucial values, and the crucial values we do have in common. And those are quality, compliance, safety, trust. And so these qualities are shared by the whole membership. Our vision is shared by the whole membership. So we're walking together to the same goal. We're not using the same avenues, but we're moving forward in the same direction. Of course, sometimes the priorities may vary between ourselves and the national level. But yeah, we try to do the best we can by helping each other. The national level needs to help the European level and vice versa.
Yeah, I mean, good point. I mean, globally, of course, you could say the security sector is united in that sense. I mean, it does have common values. And one of the great things about security is the principles are the same wherever you are in the world. I mean, and whatever you're doing, the principles of good security are the same. You think that would be a unifying force? I mean, let's go to someone else, Joe now. Joe, because you're part of the Security Commonwealth, and you mentioned it in your opening speech, and that's just for people around the world to know. This is an initiative designed to bring together the leading associations. I believe it's got over 40 who are members, and you might think that was the perfect conduit for presenting an image of security, and yet, Joe, it's problematic, partly because it's embryonic, I agree, but also because some of the elements you've spoken about, with different members having different priorities, having different sizes, it's not easy to sing from the same hymn tune even then, Joe.
No, I think quite right. You know, the Commonwealth, it's still in its sort of early stages, albeit I think it's been around for 7 years now. You know, we have here 40 members on paper. Some are more involved than others. But I think one of the tricks that we've got to learn with the Commonwealth is that we shouldn't be overshadowing the members' organisations. We shouldn't be preventing people from actually conducting their own business, doing their own networking, creating their own influence within the industry. But we should be acting as a facilitator, a conduit through some of those key messages and getting some of those key messages across. I think one of the important things about an organisation like the Commonwealth, I'd be interested if there are people listening in who belong to similar organisations, an umbrella body, for instance, for the trade associations. One of the key issues, I think, is not to be seen as a competitor of your members. Once you become a competitor of your members, then you actually start becoming, you know, almost an enemy of your members. There's no benefit in you belonging. So it's actually about harnessing the benefits and packaging the benefits and ensuring that we've got this win-win solution so that actually, you know, there's mutual benefit. And going right the way back to the strapline, that it's actually about being stronger together, that the Commonwealth's stronger and each individual member of the Commonwealth is stronger as being part of that relationship. That's still going to take some cracking, but and I'm sure it will get there. There's some great people working on it, and there's some great support behind it. But very interested in lessons from overseas as well. I'm sure we could learn an awful lot.
Yeah, I mean, as Catherine says, that point about shared values is important. Tom, I want to move on. I want to come to you next, if I might, because I've got two different points being made. You and John Reeves raised the point about the police, which in various countries, the United States, the UK, are just two examples, have faced in certain points damning reports about behaviour, really very damning reports about behaviour. And the first question is, to what extent perceptions of the police, do you think, affect people's perceptions of private security? If it's bad at the police, it's even worse at private security, perhaps, Tom. Aidan Anderson has reminded us, it says, anyone going to mention the customer? Well, I think we just need to emphasise this. It's a good point, whatever that customer is, whether it's a commercial or it's the community or the police. This point, though, about these stakeholders and their reputation and the impact that has on people like customers. Tom, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that I mean, when I first joined the started working in security media on Security Industry magazine, one of the first stories that I saw that my editor at the time was working on was a story about a guarding company that was having problems with losing prisoners while they were transporting them around the country. And then, of course, that created a huge negative impression for the industry. And then we fast forward, like you were talking about, to the Olympics, and the very negative impression that comes out of that. And unfortunately, those events only serve to reinforce people's negative perceptions of the industry. A lot of you. I mean, you mentioned, the customer. A lot of the problems that the security industry, I think, has had over the years is in trying to meet the kind of some the ill-judged expectations of their customers, and customers expect things that can't be delivered, whether that be in terms of services or cost, and often those two things collide rather disastrously. There's a real, if we're going to, I think one of the things that we need to do is, if we're going to deal with the perceptions of the security industry, we do have to get to the customer and get them to recognize the value of good security, of properly funding that. And I mean, I'm not saying anything that has been said for the last 20 years, 30 years, or longer in the security industry. But the low cost mentality tends to be one of the industry's worst enemies.
It does, Tom, but I mean, and it continues to be, of course. And I think we need to be saying it, though, because it's still just as pertinent today. I think you're right to raise it. Catherine, let me just come to you here, because is this idea about, to a certain extent, we've spoken about the security sector needs to get its act together and some of the barriers that have cropped up. But I'm interested in the view. There's some views coming in. I mean, you and Grant's mentioned what's going on in Ukraine for upper end security companies, what's been going on in police in some countries and the perceptions of security, let alone what security does to itself by some of the mishaps that Tom was just summarizing for us. There's a lot to control there. There's a lot of issues that could affect all this. And there's perhaps a feeling, well, it's too much. It's too big a task. And maybe that's why it doesn't get done, Catherine.
I really think legislation is the answer here. To give you an example, in Belgium, but also in Sweden, and I think in Spain, it's not possible to have subcontracting levels. You can only have one subcontracting level as a private security company. And that's one way of making sure that you're not subcontracting in kind of a cascade, and make sure that you have still your quality under control. Also, the background checks that are imposed on private security are actually sometimes stricter than those imposed on the police, I have to say. So no comments about that. It's just, it's a fact. But again, I think if you are looking for quality, reputation, professionalism, good service, you have to have the right legislation in place.
Is there a place? Gabriel Badia, Catherine, has got a question. Gabriel Badia says, is there a model we can look to? Is there a country that's best?
Yes, we have made a number of white papers at COES that described the best models. The Spanish model is very good, the Belgian model is very good, and the Swedish model is very good. There's of course a few others, but those three ones are generally looked upon like being the models to follow. Yes, those are the ones that meet all our boxes, basically.
And just one point very quickly, because I want to move on and get another question. David Gill's point, has it got teeth? I mean, is one of the reasons why it's good is because the regulators have got teeth, in other words, some bite, that if things go wrong, they can get some response. How big a deal is that?
It can be a problem indeed, and there's also a solution to create kind of observatories which are made both by employers and trade unions, so that if things go pear-shaped, if the legislation is not being abided by, then there is a way of saying, hey, this is not right, and you need to look into it, for example. But of course, it's never perfect, right? It always needs to be improved. But for sure, these three models that I mentioned are much better than some others. In Germany, they've been crying to have legislation. There was none. There was 0 hours of training by law, for example. So it's an interesting industry, having come from other ones, where actually it's the industry asking for stricter legislation.
But so it should. Back to your point earlier, that if it doesn't come from the industry itself. I'm going to move on because I want to get a question. Mike, Mike Gibbs has got a question here, or various people have got questions. And the question is this, Joe, it's a good one. And I'm going to ask you just to be a minute because I want to give Tom a minute on the same issue. Is security really different to anywhere else? I mean, look, every profession's got its good and bad people, lawyers, dentists, accountants. I've interviewed them in prison. As part of my research. Really, are we just beating ourselves up, and we should be a bit more relaxed? 1 minute, if you wouldn't mind, Joe, and I'll get Tom for 1 minute as well.
No, I think it should be seen as something different, in much the same way as we hold the police to a higher account, and why we're also appalled at some of the reported behaviours that we've been seeing. And I think security is in the same role. If you're going to turn to someone and seek safety and security, reassurance from them, then they should be the right person. I'm going to make one very quick reference to last week. I was in I think Westfield, which is 2 weeks ago. Westfield is one of the biggest shopping centres in Europe, I believe, is Westfield, West London. And there was a security officer there who I sort of picked out. I'm not anything to do with man guarding, but this particular individual did more to market Westfield as a safe, secure, and welcoming environment than any other person in any of those high street names, whether they're involved in security, customer service, or whatever. So I think once that sort of value is seen by clients, that actually this is good for our brand, then I think security can actually offer an awful lot. I won't say anything about other people I saw in Westfield that day, but this particular individual stood out in my mind, and I don't like shopping centres. I would feel actually quite pleased to go back to that centre.
Yeah, absolutely. Tom, I wonder if I could just get your point on this, but this point about, is security really any different, Tom?
Okay, yes, definitely, because I think, security is, comes with a mantle of authority over it. Unfortunately, with like the police, that tends to attract people with a sort of authoritarian mindset. What's interesting, Joe's example, talking about the Westfield officer, is that was a person who didn't appear to be taking an authoritarian sort of approach to it, was taking a customer service approach. I've often thought one of the problems that we have in the police is that it attracts an authoritarian type of person to work in the police. But I've heard it said that 80% of a police officer's time is spent doing more kind of social work, kind of jobs, dealing with people, dealing with troubled people. It would be nice to attract people into those professions who had a more of a sort of a caring mindset to deal with the people who are, causing the problems, for the rest of us in society.
Tom,
I hope that answers your question.
It very much so. Listen, fantastic. A few more points. Pauline Nordstrom makes the point that we've got to consider perceptions from different people. David Gill wants to argue for a security conduct authority. Maybe that's the way to go. Anastasia Nimmer, I hope I pronounced that right, Anastasia. We're too reactive in terms of promoting opinion. What about a proactive response? That seems to be missing. And really, we've got to think about barriers to improving perceptions and tackle them more. All good points, all things we can discuss another day. Thank you very much indeed, panel, for your engaging debate. I learned from that. I learned a lot from that. Thank you very much. And thank you, audience, for your questions. Just going to move on because we're just about to run out of time. Just to remind you a few final points. Nigeria, I suppose, closing on the 14th of March. They're open now in Romania. Techers and Cyber Hospitals open very soon. Get ready. Just to say, in Ireland on the 30th of March, the Irish Hospitals at lunchtime with a thought leadership webinar at the seminar at the same time. Come along if you're in Dublin. It's going to be a great show. We've got a survey going on, influencing the security budget. Please do give us your views. It's the holy grail we've been hearing today. With finance, you can do a lot. Tom made the point. Let's see if we can get your views on what the barriers are. We're back again next Thursday when we're going to be looking at the future of security. How good are we at predicting the future? The role of horizon scanning. So do join us then. Thank you once again to everybody for your questions. Thank you once again to the panel, to Sarah Gray and Christine Brooks in the background. They do a fabulous job. I hope to see you next Thursday, if not before, and wherever you are in the world. Until we meet again, stay safe.